Now we are going to walk through a method to plan your week that incorporates the 4-quadrant approach. This is more than remembering tasks in our head, but rather doing systematic thought and decision making, resulting in a structured schedule that also allows for spontaneous opportunities. Mr. Covey puts forth the idea that there are 4 generations of time management. I'll paraphrase. The first generation is to write down checklists. Checklists are better than doing nothing, but their weakness is that they are often entirely quadrant 1 tasks, spilling over to the next day and never ending as new tasks accumulate. The second generation are calendars and planners. The third generation are calendars with priority rankings of high, medium, and low. The issue here is that we often fall into a trap of saying everything is high priority. Also, if an interruption happens in the day or week, it can often throw off the entire schedule. The fourth generation involves planning the week while incorporating the 4 quadrants. We will plan a week at a time because day by day is too short-sighted and planning specifics of an entire month is too much. You can mark important dates and events that are months in advance, but it is difficult to say what you plan to do at 2:30 in the afternoon 27 days from now. The first step in the approach is to define the roles that we want to fulfill for our week. Examples of roles are student, spouse, churchgoer, athlete, teacher, project manager, musician, etc. Mr. Covey recommends keeping your roles for the week to 7 or fewer. If you find yourself having more roles than that, see if there are ways you may consolidate, because we're going to schedule tasks during the week for each role we name. For example, the roles of husband, brother, son, nephew, uncle may be better consolidated into one role, family. You do not need to fulfill all of your roles every single week. For example, I have been in charge of organizing an honor band event for high school students that took place once a year on a college campus. For several months, one of my weekly roles to fill was honor band coordinator. Once that event occurred, after completing any follow-up tasks, I did not need to include that particular role as part of my weekly planning. Once your roles are defined, you have a very important question to answer. And that is, what is one quadrant 2 goal I can and will complete this week to fulfill that role? This is the simple question that sets apart this time management strategy from others. What is an important but not urgent goal I can complete for each role? There may be many quadrant 2 goals you can think of for each role, but start out with one. For many of us, if we accomplished one Q2 goal for 5 stated roles this week, that would be at least 5 items that we would not have completed otherwise. To better organize this, what I do is have an Excel spreadsheet where I list all of my quadrant 1s and potential quadrant 2s. Simply write them down as they come to mind. When you first do this, you may likely have many quadrant 1s. Over time, this will shrink, hopefully to 0. If you find that you truly, literally have no discretionary time, a rarity, but it is possible, then you might need to wait for an opportunity for a break from work in order to knock out your quadrant 1 list so you may implement this new system. The act of writing everything down is the first step to uncluttering our mind. I saw an interview of someone whose job was to assist CEOs of large companies to be more efficient. The first thing they do is have the CEO write down everything that is on their mind. That process typically takes anywhere from 1 to 6 hours to complete. The quadrant 2 side of the list is potentially endless. There will be some items that come to mind quickly, and others will take more time. It is an opportunity to be creative, to be proactive, and to write down great ideas that you might otherwise forget. My goal is to have this Q2 list be so full of important but not urgent items that I can never be faced with a situation where I'm completely out of Q2 options to plan. My use of this particular document has evolved over time, and you can look for follow-up videos to see more information about that. Once our roles and Q2 goals are defined, it is time to put these into our weekly planner. I use this Word document template. Notice how it looks like a standard weekly planner, but it has a section for roles and goals to the left. There may be some times on the planner you need to block off initially, like classes, work, or scheduled meetings. But once that is done, you should be left with a few blocks where you have a choice of how to spend your time. You also now have a list of Q2 goals that you want to do to fulfill your roles for the week. And you likely have a number of quadrant 1 stressor tasks as well. So here's the next question. In the open blocks, which should you schedule first? Quadrant 1 tasks or quadrant 2 tasks? If you said quadrant 1s, you are like 90% of the people that answer this question, including myself. However, the answer is we should schedule quadrant 2s first. This can be demonstrated by a story that you may have heard before. I had heard this parable a couple of times and even seen it demonstrated with props, but I took away the wrong message at first. A teacher walks into his classroom with a vase. He tells the class he's going to fill this vase with these large rocks. Once filled, he asks the class, "Is it full?" Most say yes, and then he says, "If it were full, I would have no room to fill it with these smaller rocks." The smaller rocks fill up some of the spaces, and he asks again, "Is it full?" Some students say yes, and the teacher says, well, if it were full, I would have no space left for this sand. The sand then finds its way into the smaller spaces, and he asks again, is it full? Some students say yes, and the teacher says, if it were full, I would have no room for any of this water, which he proceeds to fill to the brim. Now it is full because you could not add anything else without some contents spilling out. When I first saw this, I thought the moral of the story was we always have a bit more time even when we think our time is filled. However, that was not the point, and that way of thinking is actually a symptom of an over-hectic and stressed schedule. The real point is this: had we started filling up the vase with the water first, we would have had no room for the big rocks or the other contents. The analogy is that the water represents our quadrant 1 tasks, and the big rocks are our quadrant 2s. If you start filling your discretionary time with quadrant 1 tasks first, then that time will fill up, and you will push out your ability to complete any quadrant 2 tasks. You have then, by definition, scheduled an entire week of stress and fatigue. The key is to make time for your quadrant 2 tasks as a priority. The quadrant 1s will then find a place to fit in. They have to. Ultimately, if you keep at it and do this right, you will eliminate all your quadrant 1s and be able to focus on quadrant 2s all of the time. Once learning of this system, it took me about 4 months to get in a place in my life where I was actually ready to try it. It made sense in theory, but I wasn't sure how it would work in practice. Since I had so many quadrant 1 tasks at the time while being a teacher, I felt I needed to use a winter break to really knock out those quadrant 1s and start from a clean slate. Upon trying the system, I was very excited to find that it works wonders for me. Whereas before, I was stressed out by so many tasks I needed to complete, I found that now I am actually completing more tasks, but I feel like I have even more time. In some ways, that feels like a magic trick. I also feel more focused while completing any one task because I do not have a list of quadrant 1 stressors in the back of my mind. Once you get rolling, all of your time is basically quadrant 2. If a quadrant 3 interruption occurs, you have the ability to assess and then respond, to decide if that's an opportunity to turn that quadrant 3 into a quadrant 2, and if that's not possible, to say no to the quadrant 3 event, in preference for what you already had planned. If an emergency quadrant 1 or quadrant 3 pops up that must be addressed and it pushes out a planned quadrant 2, then it's usually not the end of the world. As long as this is a rarity, the fact that your discretionary time is all quadrant 2, tasks that are important but not urgent, allows for chaos not to occur if disrupted. Once you plan your week, you have to live that week to see how it works. You will learn what does and does not work for you, and you'll have next week to improve in your planning efforts. I intend to have some follow-up videos to show more detailed examples of weekly planning, but here are some additional tips for now. 1. If something will take 10 minutes, give yourself half an hour. If something will take 28 minutes, put that task in an hour block. The Word document template and Google Calendars want to put items into half-hour or hour blocks by default, and that's a good thing. Before, when I had checklists, if I completed a 10-minute task, I would usually not feel energized. I did not feel rewarded. Rather, my thoughts would be on the next 10 or 20 tasks still on my checklist needing to be completed. With this method, when the 10-minute task is completed, I now have 20 minutes free to decide what to do. I can prepare for the next item, I can get ahead and complete something else I have scheduled for later in the week. Even if I seemingly waste that time, it does not throw me off my planned schedule. This extra time also adds to the flexibility of the system and allows for spontaneous events to still be possible with 4th-generation time management. 2. If an item involves people, be sure to plan a great deal of extra time. If you know a one-on-one meeting will only need 15 minutes and you plan exactly 15 minutes for it, in minute 13 or 14, there's the potential for a misunderstanding or conflict to arise. Because of your next important commitment about to occur, you have to cut off the conversation, and an abrupt end could really make the situation much worse. Planning for more time than is needed allows for surprise issues to be addressed. It is not advised to plan multiple tasks involving people back to back. If your task involves things, then that's not much of an issue, because a stack of papers is not going to get mad at you if you don't finish filing them in the allotted time. Mr. Covey's saying is to be efficient with things, but not with people. In future videos, I intend to show you more examples of these concepts in action. I'll show stories and examples of this system for real-life tasks. I'll show how my Quadrant 1 and Quadrant 2 Excel file has evolved over time to promote life balance. And I'll have additional tips to consider when placing items in your schedule and other benefits of using this approach to time management. In the meantime, feel free to email me or post comments for feedback or questions.